guys will learn something a little new about Georgia O'Keeffe today. I'm going through her life and some of her most famous works. I'm doing a lot of her background and her most prolific eras of her art making. Most notably when she was in New York and New Mexico. So to truly understand how Georgia O'Keeffe learned to see the world, we have to travel back to November 15th of 1887. She was born on a sprawling 1,700-acre dairy farm just outside of Sun Prairies, Wisconsin. She was born second of 7 children, born to Francis and Ida O'Keeffe, and she later reflected on this environment, saying she always felt very fortunate to have grown up on a farm. But for young Georgia, this farm wasn't merely a site for daily chores like milking cows, churning butter, or weeding gardens. It was her very first laboratory of sensory input and her initial classroom of form, texture, and color. While her siblings played traditional childhood games, Georgia was captivated by the physical materials of the earth. She was a very sensory-seeking child, constantly feeling, smelling, and tasting things to understand them. There is a famous story that she would literally sit in dirt and taste the red Wisconsin dirt and the clay. She didn't want to just look at the soil, she wanted to know its texture, the weight, and its essence. She wanted to absorb the landscape completely. The primal, direct connection to nature, undiluted by academic theories and social and societal expectations, became the foundation to her artistic identity. She learned early on that nature wasn't something to be politely observed from a distance. It was something to be deeply experienced with all 5 senses. Georgia's mother, Ida, was an incredibly educated, forward-thinking woman who demanded rigorous intellectual development for her daughters. Realizing Georgia's unique focus, her mother arranged for weekly art lessons. At just 12 years old, while sitting at the neighbor's kitchen, Georgia made a definitive declaration that shocked those around her. She looked up and stated clearly, "I'm going to be an artist." In 1899, that wasn't just an ambitious career choice for a young girl. It was an almost impossible dream. Women did not routinely become professional fine artists. They became homemakers or teachers who painted delicate little watercolors as hobbies. To foster this talent, her and her sisters made a weekly 7-mile round trip to Sun Prairie to study under a local watercolorist named Sarah Mann. By 1901, Georgia began a boarding school at the Sacred Heart Academy in Madison, Wisconsin. It was at Sacred Heart that a deceptively minor incident occurred, one that altered the career of her art history. And she did this graphite sketch when she was 13. So when she was at the Sacred Heart Academy, an art teacher there, Sister Mary Angelique, examined one of her graphite sketches of a human hand, and she criticized the drawing, not because the anatomy was wrong, but because it was really tiny on the page. It was cramped and timid. She was deeply stunned by the critique, but instead of discouraging her, it ignited something in her. She later credited this exact moment as the day she learned to draw big. This lesson became her artistic manifesto. It planted the seed for the 30-foot murals and colossal wall-sized flower paintings she would create decades later. When her family relocated to Virginia in 1902, Georgia's independent streak showed itself clearly. She chose to stay behind in Wisconsin for an extra year to finish her schooling at Madison Central High School, living with her aunt. Her high school principal quickly noticed her astonishing and almost terrifying work ethic, famously remarking, "When the spirit moves Georgia, she can do more in a day than you can do in a week." This legendary stamina and refusal to think small was the exact armor she needed to be prepared to enter the wider art world. Her New York years. In 1918, Georgia O'Keeffe made her definitive move to New York City, a transition orchestrated by the influential photographer and art dealer Alfred Stieglitz, who would later become her husband. When she arrived, she found herself in the epicenter of American industrialization and architectural ambition. New York was exploding upward and dominated by steel, concrete, and soaring skyscrapers. Yet look at what she painted. She painted both of these when she lived in New York. She didn't abandon her roots. She instead looked into her own mind, and she famously said, "I sat myself down and said to myself, I have things in my head that are not like what anyone has taught me." She brought the big vision she had first discovered in Wisconsin and applied it to her new surroundings. In the mid-1920s, she began producing works that would make her famous. Her monumental, highly magnified close-ups of flowers, sophisticated New York art critics looked at these paintings and praised them as cutting-edge, avant-garde urban abstractions. But for Georgia, these paintings weren't a product of New York intellectualism at all. They were a direct return to her childhood on the farm. She recalled a specific memory of her being 15 years old in Wisconsin, when a teacher handed her a flower and forced her to look at it under a microscope. She remembered being so utterly spellbound by how, when you look closely enough at the petals, colors, and shadows, they expand until they become your entire world. She realized that busy New Yorkers were rushing through life, completely ignoring the quiet beauty of nature. Her solution was brilliant and aggressive. She decided that if she painted a flower small, no one would look at it. But if she painted it massive, like a skyscraper, people would have to look at it. Even when she did explicitly paint New York City architecture, such as her masterpiece, Radiator Building, New York, that was the painting on the previous page. She didn't paint it like a city slicker. If you look closely at her skyscraper paintings, she treats the structures exactly like the towering grain silos and barn walls of the Wisconsin farms. She frames buildings against the night sky using the same vast, flat, geometric compositions that she learned while staring at the Midwestern horizon. She didn't conform to the city. She forced the city to conform to her rural eye, treating the urban sprawl as just another kind of natural landscape. As Georgia O'Keeffe's flower paintings gained fame, she ran headfirst into a massive wall of gender bias. The 1920s New York art world was incredibly insular, male-dominated club. Critics, largely influenced by the rise of Freudian psychoanalysis, began writing lengthy, patronizing reviews claiming that her magnifying flowers were purely sexual, Freudian expressions of her femininity. They tried to put her into a neat box, labeling her a woman artist whose work was dictated by emotion rather than intellect. Georgia was absolutely furious. She rejected these interpretations, recognizing them as an attempt to diminish her technical and formal achievements. She stood her ground with the exact same stubborn, unyielding independence her and her siblings had witnessed back in the dairy farm. She told the critics in no uncertain terms, "When you took the time to really notice my flower, you hung all your associations on flowers. You hung all your associations with flowers on my painting, and you write about my flowers as if I think and see what you think and see of the flower, and I don't." She refused to let men tell her what her own eyes had seen. She didn't want to be celebrated as a great woman artist. She wanted to be recognized as a great artist, period. She understood that her work wasn't about psychology. It was about the pure, objective art of looking. While other artists altered their styles to please the critics or to fit into popular art movements, Georgia O'Keeffe remained fiercely independent. She was a Wisconsin farm girl who knew how to weather a storm, and she refused to let the noise of the New York art market dictate her brushstrokes. This deep-seated crave for an unadorned, honest space to create would eventually pull her away from New York entirely, leading her toward a landscape that matched her inner world. By the late 1920s, the claustrophobia of New York and the relentless pressures of the art world had pushed O'Keeffe to a breaking point. In 1929, she made a decision that would define the entire second half of her life. She boarded a train and traveled to New Mexico. The moment she stepped off of the train into the high desert, she experienced a profound spiritual awakening. She immediately sat down and wrote a letter back home containing these liberating words: "I feel like myself again, and I like it." To her sophisticated friends back in New York, the American Southwest was terrifying. They viewed the desert as a harsh, dangerous, uninhabitable wasteland filled with blistering heat and venomous creatures. They could not understand why an established, successful successful New York artist want to abandon civilization for such a brutal environment? Georgia did not see this as a wasteland at all. Where they saw emptiness, she saw freedom. She constantly pointed back to her childhood origins on the Wisconsin dairy farm, a place where, as she reminded them, people worked with their hands, as the exact reason why she was uniquely equipped to thrive among the rattlesnakes, flash floods, and dust storms of New Mexico. The high desert was the very first landscape she had encountered since leaving the Sun Prairie that offered the massive, vast, and empty horizons her soul craved. The sweeping vistas of New Mexico mirrored endless, open fields of her childhood, but carved in dramatic red rock and brilliant sandstone. She didn't feel alienated by the desert. She felt a deep ancestral familiarity. She recognized it as a place stripped of all polite, unnecessary decorations. It was an honest landscape, and Georgia O'Keeffe was, above all else, an exceptionally honest woman. She had found her true spiritual home. While exploring the desert landscape around the Ghost Ranch and her home in Abiquiu, O'Keeffe began collecting animal bones that had been bleached pure white by the relentless desert sun. She brought these skeletal fragments back to her studio and began featuring them in some of her most iconic masterpieces. This is one of her most famous pieces. You'll see it if you Google Georgia O'Keeffe. This is probably one of the first pictures that will come up. It is really cool. This is one of my favorite ones. When these paintings were exhibited, the public was shocked. People naturally assumed these works were morbid, somber meditations on death, decay, and the historical trauma of the American West. But Georgia vehemently disagreed. To her, these bones had absolutely nothing to do with death. She saw them as symbols of eternal, indestructible essence of the land. She noted that the bones did not look dead to her. They cut straight to the core of form. She described looking through the empty eye sockets and pelvis bone and seeing the brilliant blue sky of the New Mexico sky, realizing that the bone didn't obscure the sky, it framed it, magnifying its color. She approached these desert elements with the exact same primal sensory hunger she had displayed as a child tasting the Wisconsin dirt. She would travel to a remote, eroded badland region she nicknamed the Black Place, spending days camping out in a small tent enduring freezing nights and blistering days just to paint the dark, undulating volcanic hills. This one is from 1944. It's called Black Place No. 2. It's very, you can tell it's very different from what she was painting before in this, very, desolate volcanic structures that she was in. In the Southwest, she found a landscape that matched her inner creative philosophy. It was a place where she could finally fulfill her ultimate definition of art, filling his space in a beautiful way, entirely free from noise, gossip, and art-critical trends of the city. She wasn't decorating a canvas, she was capturing the very anatomy of the earth. In her later years, Georgia O'Keeffe wrote from her adobe home, "I wish you could see what I see out the window. The earth pink and yellow from cliffs to the north, the most beautiful night I've ever seen." When O'Keeffe permanently moved to New Mexico in 1949, following the death of Alfred Steinges, she was not reinventing herself. She was returning home. She didn't find a new vision out west. She simply reclaimed the vast, unadorned horizon she had first learned to love as a little girl in Sun Prairie. When her New York friends wrote to her, asking her how she could possibly survive in such a harsh cultural wasteland, she didn't hit them with complex avant-garde theory. She just talked about Wisconsin. She told them she was a woman who worked with her hands, a proud product of a rural farming community where stamina, resilience, and practicality weren't abstract concepts. They were a mandatory way of life. Even when her physical body began to fail her in her later years, her artistic spirit remained entirely unbroken. In her 80s, she began losing her central vision due to macular degeneration, leaving her with only her peripheral sight. For many painters, this would be the end, but true to her form, she refused to stop creating. When she could no longer see her hands to guide her paintbrush, she pivoted. She put down the paintbrush and placed her hands directly onto a potter's wheel. It was a beautiful, profound, full circle in the twilight of her life. She returned to sculpting the raw, wet earth as a final poetic return to the feel and texture of the red clay she had first sat and tasted as a child in Wisconsin. And you can see here she's posing with one of her clay pots. And then, I don't know if she named any of her clay works. It didn't. I couldn't find any. But she did simple ones like these where it was on a wheel and she was sculpting them just with her hands. And then she did one other one. I couldn't get the image to work on my slideshows. Every time I would try and put an image, it was like, image file unsupported. I'm like, what the heck? So I couldn't put an image, but it was this really cool, like, swirly looking pot. It was really large too. But these are from 1980. So she was getting up there. She passed.
How would she have been?
She would have been, I want to say, 94. Or maybe 92. Hold on.
Maybe that's why she didn't name it. She couldn't remember.
Yeah, I was saying, she couldn't remember which one was which, you know? She was like, I don't know, I can't remember these ones' names. And today, if you visit the intersection of Town Hall Drive and County Highway T in Sun Prairie, you won't find her home or her farmhouse where she was born. It burned down in 1976. But you will find a landscape that is true to Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings. Wide, quiet, and filled with the wideness and wonder of the world. And this is a little picture of what's there now. I think it's a cornfield behind it as well. But it's just rolling hills, and it's got a birthplace, like, memorial sign kind of thing. And yeah, that went a lot faster than I thought. Sorry guys, I read too fast. My apologies, it's still like that. If you have any questions, you can ask me. You can fill some time with me. Sorry about that.
She died.
She was 98 when she died. So, started doing art in 1901 to 1980, 84, I think is what it said.
I went to a museum in New Mexico, and I think it was in Albuquerque. I can't remember for sure, but it was a studio of hers, and showed all her stuff, or a lot of it. It was in the midst of people selling turquoise jewelry and all this kind of thing. It was really neat.
Yeah, those are always super cool, and that was probably really cool. There's a lot of museums of her.
Yeah.
I found a lot of my images from the museum websites.
She does have a museum in New Mexico, or the Georgia.
Yes, she has the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in New Mexico.
What made you interested in Georgia O'Keeffe?
Well, I was asked to do this program, and so that was why I did this to begin with, but she's just very interesting. I like that she was, I like that she kind of wanted to break out of the box. She didn't really go along with everything like the art critics were saying in New York, so she was like, no, I'm gonna do my own thing in New Mexico. You guys can like, go be over there and do your hoity-toity stuff over there. And I just like that she was kind of like her own, she's very like independent, and I really like that about
Her
her.
stuff was very, very, very different.
Yes, I love her work. It's very gorgeous.
I do too, Libby. I do too.
Alright, does anyone else have any questions? Sorry that was kind of short, guys. Sorry.